What would you do if the most dangerous man in the city handed you back your stolen purse? And inside it, he'd left something that wasn't yours to begin with. That's exactly what happened to a young woman named Faye Sutton on a Tuesday night in October, in the kind of rain that makes Montreal feel like the edge of the world. And by the time it was over, nothing about either of their lives would ever look the same again. Stay with me. This one's going to get under your skin. The rain came down hard on Rue Saint-Jacques, the kind that turns the cobblestones black and sends everyone sensible indoors. Everyone except Faye Sutton, who was running late, again, her canvas bag slung over one shoulder, her shift at Le Comptoir Bleu starting in 4 minutes, and her boots already soaked through at the toes. She didn't notice the man who fell into step behind her. She was thinking about the electric bill, about whether her landlord had finally fixed the lock on the back door, about whether she'd remembered to call her mother back. She wasn't thinking about the hand that slipped into her bag with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. By the time she pushed open the door to the diner, the man was already gone. Le Comptoir Bleu wasn't much to look at. Formica countertops gone yellow at the edges, a row of stools with cracked vinyl seats, a blackboard menu that hadn't changed in 6 years. But it was warm, and it was steady work, and Faye Sutton had been pouring coffee there since she was 19 years old. She knew every regular by name. She knew who took their eggs over easy, and who needed the decaf even when they asked for the real thing. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the man who'd taken her purse that evening was sitting in the corner booth of a restaurant 4 blocks away, turning her wallet over in his hands like it was something that might bite him. His name was Bastien Royce, and in Montreal's underworld, that name meant something. It meant the docks on the south end, where cargo moved at odd hours with no paperwork attached. It meant the envelope that arrived at the right desk before a city council vote. It meant a network of quiet arrangements that kept violence off the streets by ensuring that no one was stupid enough to start any. Bastien Royce was 41 years old, built like a man who had survived things, and had not been personally arrested once in 22 years of operating at the precise intersection of money, fear, and patience. He did not steal wallets. That was the first thing his lieutenant, a wiry man named Corbin, said when Bastien walked back into the private dining room and set the worn canvas purse on the table. "You took a woman's bag. I needed to know who she was." Corbin looked at him. "You could have had someone follow her." "I needed to see what she was carrying." That was different. Corbin knew better than to press when Bastien used that voice, the flat, careful one that meant he had already thought about something more than he was saying. He sat back and watched as Bastien unzipped the main compartment and laid the contents on the white tablecloth, one by one. A lip balm, a transit pass, a phone with a cracked screen and a case that had a small enamel pin of a sparrow on it. A wallet, thin brown leather, the corners rubbed pale. A folded receipt from a pharmacy. And a photograph. It was the photograph that Bastien had already seen, that had already stopped him cold on the street, that had made his hand close around the bag before his brain had quite finished deciding to. He picked it up again now, in the better light. It was old, printed on the kind of matte paper they used in the 90s, slightly faded at the edges. 2 children, maybe 7 and 9 years old, standing in front of a chain-link fence with a concrete building behind them. The boy was taller, dark-haired, with a gap in his front teeth and a scrape along his jaw that someone had put a bandage on. He had his arm around the smaller girl, as if he were daring the world to try something. The girl was laughing, really laughing, eyes crinkled shut, head tipped back, holding something up toward the camera, a sparrow. A real one, small and brown and improbably still, perched on her small finger. Bastien set the photograph down on the tablecloth. His hands were not entirely steady. The boy in that photograph was his brother who had been dead for 11 years. If you're just joining us here at Sadie's Romance Library, welcome. Make yourself comfortable, because this story has everything. Secrets buried deep enough to survive a decade, a man who built his whole life around a wound he never let heal, and a woman who had no idea she was carrying the answer with her all along. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss where this is going. Faye didn't notice her bag was gone until her shift ended at 11. She stood in the back doorway of Le Comptoir Bleu, coat on, reaching automatically for the strap that should have been over her shoulder, and found nothing. The cold settled into her stomach first, that specific dread of a woman alone at night, realizing she has no keys, no transit pass, no phone. She retraced her steps mentally, the walk from the metro, the rain, the man she hadn't noticed. She borrowed her coworker Gretchen's phone to call her landlord, who let her in with visible irritation. She sat in her small apartment on Rue Clark in the dark for a moment before she found the light switch, and she thought that photograph was in there. The one of Owen and the bird. It was the only photograph she had of her brother. Owen Sutton had died 11 years ago at 26 in a boating accident on Lac Saint-Jean. The investigation had lasted 8 months and concluded with a verdict of accidental drowning. A verdict that Faye had never entirely believed, because Owen had been the best swimmer she knew, and because 3 days before he died, he had called her from a number she didn't recognize and said, in a voice that was carefully, deliberately calm, "Faye, if anything happens to me, don't look for answers. Just live your life. Promise me." She had promised. She had not kept the promise. It had taken her 4 years of quiet, stubborn, going now-here investigation before she'd accepted that she was not a detective, and she didn't have the resources, and she was not going to find anything. She had packed her notes into a box and put the box under her bed, and tried to be a person who had let it go. The photograph had stayed in her wallet because she needed to see his face. The way he was laughing. The way he'd always laughed. All the way back to when they were children at St. Basile's foster home in Laval, before their grandmother had come for Faye and taken her home and left Owen behind by 2 years while paperwork sorted itself out. She didn't sleep that night. In the morning, Bastien Royce was sitting in a chair across from a man named Lyle Beauchamp, who was the closest thing Bastien had ever had to a fixer, a lawyer, and a conscience in a single human being. Lyle was 63, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had a habit of letting silences stretch until the other person felt compelled to fill them. Bastien did not fill them. He let the silence sit, and then he said, "I need everything you can find on a woman named Faye Sutton. Works at a diner on Saint-Jacques, mid-20s. Lyle made a note. What are we looking for? Her family history, who she's connected to, whether anyone's been watching her." A pause. "She's carrying a photograph of a boy I knew." Lyle took off his reading glasses. "The boy you knew, are we talking about?" "Yes." Another silence, different in quality. "Bastien." Lyle chose his words with the care of a man diffusing something. "Whatever this woman's connection is to Olivier, Owen." The correction came out sharp. He went by Owen. Lyle inclined his head. "Whatever her connection is, before you do anything, you need to know whether she's connected to the people who—" "I know what I need to know, Lyle. You know what you want to know. Those aren't always the same." Bastien stood. He left the wallet and its contents on Lyle's desk, minus the photograph, which he had folded carefully and put in the inside pocket of his jacket, over his chest, the way you carry something you're not ready to explain. "Find her history," he said. "And find out if she's being watched." Faye was being watched. She didn't know it yet. The man doing the watching was not particularly threatening looking, a soft-faced man in a gray coat who seemed to spend a lot of time reading a newspaper near the metro entrance closest to her apartment. But Bastien's people noticed him within 6 hours of starting to look, and when Bastien got the report that evening, he sat with it for a long time. Someone had been keeping quiet tabs on Faye Sutton for at least the past 2 months. The gray-coat man rotated with a woman who sometimes took a table at Le Comptoir Bleu and nursed a coffee for 2 hours. Not aggressive, not threatening, just watching, which meant Faye Sutton was not an innocent bystander who had happened to end up with his brother's photograph, which meant the photograph was in her wallet for a reason. Lyle called at 9 that evening with the first layer of history. Faye Sutton, 24 years old, born in Laval, raised in part at St. Basile's group home between the ages of 6 and 8 before being placed with a maternal grandmother. One older brother, Owen Sutton, deceased, ruled accidental drowning 2015. No criminal record, no known associations, currently renting a 1-bedroom on Rue Clark, working 2 jobs, taking an online certificate course in early childhood education, and then Lyle said, "Her brother Owen." Before he died, he was working as a freight coordinator at Beaumont Logistics. The name landed like a stone into still water, Beaumont Logistics, which had been, for a period of approximately 4 years in the early 2010s, the primary front company used by the Sauvé family, the syndicate that Bastien had spent the better part of a decade dismantling quietly, piece by piece, through a combination of economic pressure, strategic exposure, and the occasional disappeared shipment. The Sauvé family, who had been the dominant organized crime force in Montreal before Bastien's network had rendered them first irrelevant and then largely insolvent. The Sauvé family, who had been responsible for the death of his brother, Owen, his brother's best friend, not biological, but the kind of friendship that forms in the particular crucible of a group home, the kind that means more than blood sometimes, had been working inside Beaumont without knowing what he was inside of. At least, that was what Bastien had always believed, had always chosen to believe, because the alternative was something he had never let himself consider. He needed to talk to Faye Sutton. The question was how to do it without confirming to whoever was watching her that she mattered to someone. He chose the diner. The next evening he walked into Le Comptoir Bleu at 6:15, sat down at the counter like a man who had nowhere particular to be, and ordered a coffee. He was wearing different clothes than he typically wore. Nothing sharp, nothing that carried the quiet signal of money his usual wardrobe did. Dark jeans, a gray sweater, a jacket that had seen better days. He looked like a contractor between jobs. He was, in his considered opinion, quite convincing. Faye Sutton came out of the kitchen with a tray of plates and nearly ran directly into him. She caught herself. She apologized automatically, the way people in the service industry learn to apologize for other people's positioning in their space. Then she looked up. He slid her bag across the counter. She went very still. "You dropped this," he said. She looked at the bag. She looked at him. Up close she had a quality he hadn't expected. Not wariness exactly, more like alertness, the kind that comes from paying close attention to things. Her eyes didn't have any warmth in them right now, which was fair. "I didn't drop it," she said. "No," he agreed. "You didn't." She set her tray down on the nearest table with the steadiness of someone who had decided, in real time, that she was not going to be flustered by this. She picked up the bag and looked inside it. She checked the wallet. He had returned everything exactly as he'd found it, every card in its slot, the transit pass, the receipt, the lip balm. She looked up at him. "The photograph," she said. "I need to talk to you about that. That's mine. I know. I'll give it back, but I need to talk to you first." He kept his voice level. "Your brother knew someone I knew. I need to understand how." Whatever she had expected him to say, and she had clearly been preparing herself to say something sharp back, it wasn't that. He watched the calculation move across her face. Caution, yes, but also something else. Something that looked uncomfortably like recognition. "What was his name?" she said carefully. "The person Owen knew." Bastien looked at her across the counter of a diner that smelled of coffee and fried potatoes, with the Montreal evening darkening the windows outside, and said, "His name was Olivier, but everyone called him Remy." Faye Sutton sat down on the nearest stool. He watched her eyes go through something that was not quite shock, more like the look of a person who has been carrying a question for so long that they've almost stopped believing it has an answer, and then abruptly, without warning, the answer is standing in front of them in a gray sweater at the counter of their diner. "Remy," she said. "He came to Owen's funeral. I know, I couldn't." "Why not?" He held her gaze. "Because the people who killed your brother were watching the funeral, and if I'd been there, they would have known that Remy was important to me. And Remy was—" He stopped. Something moved in his jaw. Remy was already gone by then. I was trying to keep him gone. The diner was quiet around them. Gretchen was taking an order at the far end. There were 4 other customers, none of them close. Outside, the gray-coat man was presumably reading his newspaper somewhere in the vicinity. "Owen wasn't an accident," Faye said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Bastien said. "He wasn't." She breathed out. It was a long, slow, controlled breath, the kind that takes practice. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me all of it." He didn't tell her all of it that night. He told her enough. He told her that Remy, Olivier Royce, had been his best friend from the age of 8, when they'd both been at a different group home, a smaller one in the East End, before they'd been separated into different placements. That Bastien had aged out and found his own way, which had not been a good way, initially, but had become profitable and then powerful in the specific way that power operates in the spaces that legitimate society leaves empty. That Remy had stayed straight, had worked hard, had ended up in logistics and management, and had been, by all accounts, building a quiet and decent life. Until Beaumont Logistics had hired him, not knowing, or not caring, that Remy knew exactly who his boss's boss was. That the Sauvé family had connections that ran through that company like rot through old wood. That Remy had figured it out, slowly, and had then made the mistake of telling Owen. And Owen had made the mistake of documenting it. He was going to the police, Faye said. It wasn't quite a question, that was the plan. A whistleblower complaint, with documentation. He had a contact in the SPVM, someone he trusted. Bastien's voice was steady, but his hands, she noticed, were not entirely relaxed on the countertop. The contact turned out not to be trustworthy. She thought about the phone call, the one from the unknown number. If anything happens to me, don't look for answers. He was protecting me, she said. He loved you, and he knew that if you pulled on that thread, whoever was watching would notice. He needed you to be invisible. She looked at the bag on the counter, her worn-out, ordinary canvas bag with its sparrow pin on the case of her phone. Why am I being watched now, she said. Owen's been gone for 11 years. Beaumont folded. The Sauvé family is. She paused, reassessing how much she actually knew about Montreal's recent crime landscape, and whether she should be demonstrating it in front of this man. Gone, she finished, diplomatically. Mostly, Bastien said. There are remnants. And the documentation Owen was building, it was never recovered. The SPVM contact who turned on him took it, but he's since died, and whoever he passed it to is still looking for it. Faye was quiet. Because it's not just about Beaumont, Bastien continued. It implicates a sitting municipal councillor, someone who has a great deal to lose, even now, so they're watching me, because they think I have it, or because they think you might eventually lead them to it. She looked at him directly. Do I have it? It was the right question, the honest question. He appreciated that she asked it instead of deflecting. I don't know, he said. But I think Remy might have given Owen something to give to you. Not obviously, not in a way that would make you a target if someone searched your apartment. He paused. Something you might be carrying without knowing what it is. She found it at 2 a.m. She'd gone home after her shift, made tea she didn't drink, sat at her small kitchen table, with everything from her wallet spread out in front of her. She'd been through it all before, the night after Owen's death, and in the months afterward, looking for anything she might have missed. But she looked again now with different eyes, with the knowledge of what she was actually looking for. The transit card. It was old, much older than it should have been, given how often she replaced them. She'd found it in a box of Owen's things after he died, had assumed it was one of his, had kept it because it still had a couple of rides left on it, had been reloading it automatically for 11 years. She turned it over. On the back, in the slightly raised texture of the cardstock, barely visible unless you were looking, a series of digits, not a phone number, not a transit number, an account number and what appeared to be a security code pressed into the plastic with something precise and thin, like a stylus or a toothpick, in the kind of careful small letters that you would only notice if you ran your thumbnail across the surface in the right light. Owen, 11 years, and her brother had still managed to find a way to be clever. She texted the number Bastien had given her. I think I found it. What do I do now? The response came in 40 seconds. Don't go anywhere, I'm sending someone. And then 3 minutes later, another text from the same number. Actually, I'm coming myself. The next 72 hours were not restful. Bastien arrived at her apartment with Corbin and a woman named Sasha, who had the energy of someone who had worked in private security for a decade and had opinions about everyone's operational security that she did not hesitate to share. They swept the apartment. They changed the lock on the back door, which Faye did not comment on, though she noted it. They copied the information from the transit card without removing it from her possession because, Bastien explained, the card staying with her was safer than it disappearing. And then they waited. The gray-coat man came back the next morning. This time, he had company. A woman with a red umbrella who took a very pointed interest in the entrance to Faye's building. Bastien's network watched them watching, and Bastien made a phone call that Faye was not in the room for, in a voice that she could hear through the wall, was quiet and precise and entirely without anger, which somehow made it more unsettling than anger would have been. What Faye did not expect was the moment, late on the second evening, when Bastien came and sat down at her kitchen table and said, with the air of someone lowering a piece of armor that is very heavy, "Raimi used to talk about you." She looked up. "He said you had a way with birds, that you could hold still long enough that they'd land on you. He said you'd done it at St. Basile's once. A sparrow came right to your hand, and all the other kids were furious because they'd been trying for weeks." Faye felt something happen in her chest. Owen used to say that too. "He took that photo. I know. He sent it to Raimi. Years after, maybe 5-6 years after you'd both left. He found it in a box somewhere and thought Raimi would want to see it." Bastien looked down at his hands on the table. "Raimi kept it, had it on his fridge. I saw it 100 times. She thought about what that meant. That for years, without her knowing, a photograph of her had been on the fridge of a man she'd never met. That the sparrow in her wallet had been in Raimi's kitchen all along. He never reached out," she said. "He didn't want to complicate your life. He knew Owen worried about you." A pause. "And then by the time things started going wrong at Beaumont, he was very deliberately not telling anyone he cared about anything at all, to protect them." "Yes." She looked at him. "Like you're doing now." He met her eyes, and for a moment the careful steadiness he maintained slipped just enough that she could see what was underneath it. The grief that had been sitting there for 11 years, alongside the particular weight of a man who has spent a decade making sure someone else's death meant something. "He was the only family I had," Bastien said. "Both of us were. We made each other family." Faye nodded slowly. "So did Owen and I." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Montreal moved in its ordinary nighttime way, oblivious. "I'm going to protect you," he said. It was not a question and not quite a promise, more like a statement of something already decided. "Whatever happens in the next few days, you don't have to trust me, but I need you to let me." She considered him for a long moment. A man who had built his life in the shadows, who moved through the city like weather, who had come and sat at her kitchen table at 11 at night and told her about a sparrow on a fridge. "Okay," she said. The resolution, when it came, was not cinematic. It happened in a conference room in a building in Old Montreal, with a lawyer, a senior officer from the SPVM's organized crime unit, a different one, vouched for through channels that bypassed the entire previous chain of command, and a city councillor named Gérard Poulain, who arrived with the serene confidence of a man who had been insulated from consequences for so long he had forgotten they applied to him. The account information from Owen's transit card contained access to a private server on which Owen had stored encrypted copies of every document, every internal communication, every payment record he had quietly photographed over a period of 14 months before his death. He had known, at the end, that the SPVM contact was compromised, so he had stored a copy somewhere else, and he had handed the key to his sister, who had been reloading it faithfully for 11 years without knowing what she carried. Gérard Poulin's serene confidence lasted approximately 12 minutes into the meeting. Faye was not in that room. Bastien had asked whether she wanted to be, and she had thought about it, and said no. She didn't need to watch it happen. She just needed to know that it did. She found out that evening, when Bastien came back to her apartment with takeout from a Vietnamese place on Duluth, and told her that Poulin had been taken into custody, that the remaining surveillance on her building had dissolved within the hour, and that the documentation Owen had spent 14 months building had been entered into evidence that would likely make headlines by the end of the week. She ate her foe in silence for a little while. "What happens to you?" she asked eventually. "With the police involved now, is that complicated?" he said. "Not immediately dangerous." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been considering for some time whether certain aspects of my professional life have run their natural course." She looked at him. "Is that a careful way of saying you're thinking about getting out?" "It's a careful way of saying that I have been thinking about what I'm building things toward." He considered his chopsticks. For a long time, the answer was accountability for what happened to Raimi. Now that chapter is closing, and the next one? He looked at her across the small kitchen table, with the remains of takeout between them and Montreal outside the window going about its evening, and the sparrow pin on her phone case catching the light. "I don't know yet," he said. "I think that might be the most honest thing I've said in years." She smiled, just slightly, the small smile of someone who knows they're at the beginning of something. "Remy used to tell Owen that you were the most stubborn person he'd ever met. Owen told me. I used to wonder what that person was like. And now? Worse than advertised," she said, and somehow exactly right. They found each other, those two, not in spite of the tragedy that connected them, because of what it had made of them. Faye Sutton, who had carried an answer for 11 years without knowing, who had kept faith with her brother by simply refusing to throw anything of his away, and Bastien Royce, who had spent those same years building something formidable out of grief and will, and the stubborn conviction that Raimi's death was going to mean something one way or another. The spring came, as it always does, late. And then all at once, the way springs do in Quebec, the ice went out of the river. The terraces opened on the plateau. Le Comptoir Bleu got new stools with properly intact vinyl seats, which Feify pointed out was long overdue. And in the corner booth, on a Thursday afternoon, a man who had once moved through the city like a shadow sat with a cup of coffee and watched a woman he was just beginning to know laugh at something. Her coworker said, "Really laugh," eyes crinkled, head tipped back, and he thought of a photograph, of a little girl with a sparrow on her finger, holding completely still in the middle of everything. He understood now why Raimi had kept it on his fridge. Some things you hold on to because they remind you that something innocent survived, that in the middle of all the machinery of the world, something small and unafraid landed on an outstretched hand and stayed. So here's what I want to ask you, and I genuinely want to know, so leave it in the comments. Is there something you've carried for years, without knowing what it was worth? Owen trusted his sister with the most important thing he ever built, and he did it by hiding it in plain sight. What does that say about the people who know us best? If this story got to you, and I think it might have, share it with someone who needs a good cry and a happy ending. And if you're new here at Sadie's Romance Library, welcome home. There are more stories where this one came from. I'll see you in the next one.